Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another review. As you can tell from up there, it is that time of the year again. It is time for Monster Fest. Well, this year I decided to do something interesting. I'm probably not going to do as many episodes as I normally do. I usually try to do 15 to 20. I'm probably going to do 15 at maximum, depending how my schedule is. Probably 10 will be about the right number, pace them out a little bit. But compensate for that, I am going to be focusing mostly on a single decade. The reason I say mostly is that if time permits, I might try to do films that connect to the other ones, like, as you can tell from the title up there, one I might do, but we'll just see how it permits. The decade I'm going to be focusing on is the 80s, because I felt, that if I'm going to do one focusing on a decade, the 80s seems like a good place to start. Anyway, I'm starting with a film that I have reviewed a couple times before. I actually still have a review up on this channel. I just felt like re-reviewing it, give fresh thoughts and stuff on it. It, of course, is the John Carpenter directed film from 1982, and a film I consider to be one of the best remakes in cinema and in horror. So it's a twofer. It, of course, is The Thing. This is my special edition DVD copy of it, which, from what I understand, this is the reprint of the collector's edition. I think the thing that gives it away is probably the cover, because I think the other one had the original cover, which I guess that's probably why they did it with this cover. So, this is a reprint, when you could have just done it with the same cover and make it obvious that it'd kind of be obvious it was a reprint from the fact it probably had a different case. But there's only one major difference between this and the old one from what I looked up, and that one has isolated tracks or something on one of the features, I don't know. But it still has an excellent documentary, I don't know why I said it that way, but that's part of the reason I know this is the original special edition and not a new one, because you could tell from how this documentary is that it was filmed in the 90s, probably 97, 98ish, which is around the time, from what I understand, that the original special edition came out. And it has interviews with John Carpenter, Kurt Russell, special effects makeup designer Rob Bottin, legendary matte artist Albert Whitlock, and other casting crew members, the other actors, and it even has a brief interview with Stan Winston, because he contributed one special effects thing to it, which I kind of suspected, but I didn't remember off the top of my head if he did. And it has stop motion animation cut from the film, which I need to go back and watch. From what I've been told, it was bad, which is why it was cut, but maybe by the time I upload this, I'll put it in the comment section whether I liked it or not. The trailer, some behind-the-scenes stuff. I only watched little tidbits that were deleted, which a couple of them could have stayed in the final film, but I can understand why a couple of them were cut, for suspense and all that. But anyway, the film has an 8.2 on IMDb. It has a 92% with the audience on Rotten Tomatoes and an 80 with the critics, and this is the consensus. Grimmer and more terrifying than the 1950s take, John Carpenter's The Thing is a tense sci-fi thriller rife with compelling tension and some remarkable makeup effects. I will agree with that. This is the definition of a horror thriller, because the tension throughout the whole film, it just makes you wonder who's the thing, who's not the thing, and all that. And from what Carpenter said in the documentary, that's part of the reason he wanted to do the film. I mean, he grew up with the original one, and then something about finding the short story and then seeing that there was more there. And, the main thing of the film is the tension, is like, who's the thing, who's not the thing. And Carpenter, in my opinion, did an excellent job in directing that. It's just sad that the film was basically a flop in the time it was released. It was made for $15 million, made only about $19 million, which I don't think that $15 million counts, marketing, and then also the theater takes a little bit of it, so it probably was like $10 million, or maybe even $7 million that the studio got. But I'm glad it's one of those films that, even though it flopped, it found its audience later. Now, part of the reason, from what I understand, that it flopped is it was released the same weekend as Blade Runner, and not that long after E.T., which had a more upbeat look at alien encounters, which I don't really blame either of those films. It's just because you can still see stuff like this happening today. It's that they release a lot of these films all around one another, and then the audience has to decide which film I want to go see. Now, it's a little better when when the economy is booming a little bit more, so they can go see more films, or if you really make a lot of money, you can still go see a lot of films. But when the economy is in a rudder, and you know you're gonna pick and choose what looks the most interesting. Which, since I obviously didn't live in the 80s, I don't know specifically if 82 was a time of such, but just from what I know about Reaganomics and all that, this might be around the time that was starting, but who knows. I'd have to look it up specifically, and I don't have the time to do it in this video. Even though I have unlimited time, I just don't want to do it. But I'm guessing it's probably a little bit of the economy plus, you know, marketing burnout with all the other films. Which makes me wonder why they chose to release them around the same time instead of pacing them out more, but that's a whole other thing. Now, anyway, the screenplay was by Bill Lancaster, which he did an excellent job. I haven't read the short story, but from what I read, it's basically the same. There's only minor differences, like the ending. The end with finding out who the final thing is. But adding on to that, I think, is excellent for the medium of film. And the short story, you can get away with it and then leave it to the audience to decide what happens. The music was by Ennio Morricone, which when you listen to it, you're like, that's a John Carpenter-like score. Apparently he did that intentionally, which I think is kind of cool, and it really sets the bleak tone for the film. In addition to Kurt Russell as MacReady, we got Wilford Brimley as Blair. Of course, nowadays Brimley is best known for those diabetes commercials. Donald Moffat as Gary, Richard Marr as Clark, Keith David as Childs, and of course Keith David's with that very distinctive voice. David Clennon as Palmer, Charles Hallahan as Norris, Richard Dreist as Cooper, T.K. Carter as Knowles, who I'm guessing is the youngest member of the crew. Peter Maloney as Bennings, Joel Polis as Fuchs, I'm guessing Thomas G. Waits as Windows, and then the two Norwegians played by Norbert Wessler and Larry J. Franco. Oh, this is something I didn't know. Bill Lancaster is the son of Burt Lancaster. I didn't know that. That's kind of cool. Now, there was a bunch of interesting stories on the documentary, which I don't want to spoil all of them, but I'm going to mention a couple of them here. And one of them is how Rob Bottin and John Carpenter first met. They first met when Carpenter was working on The Fog. Bottin, I forget off the top of my head how he got in there, but he was talking with them and he asked to play one of the roles, which he played one of the ghosts in the film. And of course Carpenter asked him to stand up, and he did, but of course what was going through his head is he going to say, and get out, you know, the usual Hollywood thing. Oh, you're going to ask for a job? Get the fuck out of here! But of course, from what I understand, Carpenter is not like that. I mean, the only move like that I've ever heard that he's pulled is because of his little animosity with the late Mustafa Akkad. You know, over the Halloween thing, him asking for the $20 million to direct H2O, which that's really the only dick thing I've heard him do. But if you know the animosity between them, you can see why he did it, but not excuse it. But that's a whole other thing. What he did is he wanted to see how big Bottin was, and of course he liked how big he was, and he cast him. And I don't remember if he worked on Escape from New York, but I know he worked on this one as most of the special effects. So all the effects you see in the film are done by him, and it's fun to hear all the stories he mentions about him, like when they were doing the part with the head coming off the body, apparently during the first take, because Carpenter wanted fire near the bottom of the lens, and there was flammable air, and there was flammable stuff in the air because of what was inside the neck. It caused like a little poof of fire, and the prop was on fire. And Carpenter's like, put the thing out! I know he tells the story better, but it's just the way they tell it. It's just a funny story. And what the infamous scene where the arms get bitten off, that for when he pulls it up they used an amputee, which I kind of suspected they did, but I didn't know if it was that or if it was a very well made and well shot animatronic, but it was just an amputee wearing a face mask. But you're so concentrating on what's happening with the body that you don't pay attention to what's happening with the guy who got his arms bit off. Now, I still haven't seen the first one, so maybe if I do another non-80s review after this, it'll probably be the original film. But on its own, as you can probably already guess, very fun film. Now I'm checking stuff under production real quick. Excellent use of matte paintings, which I don't want to spoil all of it because a lot of it's on the documentary. If I can find it on YouTube, I'll put it in the description box. But it's interesting to see how they did the matte painting stuff, and then watching it, I'm still thinking they should really do more of this stuff nowadays. There's no excuse except, oh, we gotta CG it, CG it, CG it, CG it. But I know I'm going a little bit more. I don't mean to go on a rant there. It's just, I prefer in-house effects. It gives it a more organic feel. Now, one thing I kind of suspected, but reading up on the film, is that the film was filmed on location for the outside stuff and in the studio for the inside stuff, which makes sense. And it's kind of cool to see that how they did all this. And from what I understand, it looks like the Norwegian camp was one of the last things filmed because they used the ruins of the original camp, which makes sense. But it's kind of cool how they did that. Now, the plot of the film is that in the Antarctic, we have this American station there where all these people are there. It doesn't really state why, but you can kind of guess it's probably for research. Anyway, one day a dog comes into their camp in a helicopter with Norwegians driving it, is chasing it, and they're trying to kill the dog. And of course, in the process, they accidentally shoot one of their own members, and then they have no choice but to kill them. They go back to the Norwegian camp and find out that they had found something in the ice, which turns out to be an extraterrestrial body. Now, they take one of the burnt remains they found back to their camp, but soon they also discover that the dog that they had is actually one of these things. They kill the dog when it's assimilating some of the other dogs, which this is the excellent special effect that Stan Winston did for the film, and it's nice to hear him talk about it, how like the dog head was basically just a glorified hand puppet that the person underneath it did, which is pretty good, and it still looks amazing all these years later. Well, they find out that the thing has been frozen in the ice for at least 100,000 years inside of a flying saucer. And one thing that I like about the film is that it never states if the flying saucer is from the thing's own race or from another race, but it's most likely that one, considering it's how it assimilates life forms. Because this thing is most likely kind of like a symbiote thing. The closest thing I can think of is kind of like the symbiotes from Marvel, or any other weird life form like this, or like the later life form from Species. Kind of like a parasitic life form, in a way. Though the symbiotes from Marvel I wouldn't really call a parasite, because it's basically in symbiosis, which is a little bit different than being a parasite. But anyway. Now, once they've all found out about this, they're wondering, okay, the dog was one of them. Did it turn one of us? This is more so with Blair at first. And as the film goes on, you know that someone is the thing, and that it's taking people out one by one, slowly. We never see it on screen except for like the big scenes, like the scene involving the, Claire, you gotta be fucking kidding, the head thing. And then of course the infamous blood test scene, which I don't want to spoil in its entirety for those who haven't seen the film. And of course the finale. Those are the only really times where we see the thing. Of course also the dog one, but that one, it's only really attacking the dogs, not the people. But other than that, it's all in shadows and stuff, and you never see directly who it is, but there is tension. Like, is MacReady the thing at one point? Is Blair the thing? Is someone else the thing? And it's really up for debate when and where someone is taken and becomes the thing. Like, now this is a minor spoiler, but in the end of the film, Blair is the final thing. Like, with how he acts at one point in the film, makes you wonder, was he taken at one point and the thing saw how his mind was, so he used Blair, saying he's going to save the world as a red herring, knowing that it would make the other people segregate him so he'd be safe, especially if another person became the thing, because they know, okay, keep him out there, he'll be, our trump card just in case something goes wrong. And did he also know, okay, they're probably going to send a rescue helicopter when they don't have contact with any of us for a while, so I'll be fine, stuff like that. And then it makes you wonder that before he did that, did he take someone out, and that's why he wasn't worried about doing that? It's all up for debate, and from what I read on IMDb, even to this day, John Carpenter doesn't know himself when and where someone was taken. But of course, he does know the thing at the very end, which it's one thing I semi-noticed when I watched it, but then I confirmed it by looking on IMDb, because apparently MacReady's the only one that full-on survives. But this was, of course, before the pre-make was made. So but since this is Carpenter's film, I'm going to go more with his interpretation of it, and that is that MacReady's the only one that's survived, and that Childs was The Thing, which, when you look at the fact that he's not breathing as heavily, even though he got lost in the snow, his breath should be a little bit more visible. But I know that's another minor spoiler, but it's something I had to mention. It's an interesting one. And of course, I'll probably address the mechanics of that with the pre-make if I ever get around to re-reviewing that film. Now, the acting in the film, all the actors do good for what they have to do. The actors that do more in the film, like Russell, Brimley, David, and Carter, they got a little bit more stuff. The other actors do what they can for what they have to, for how much their characters are. And there really isn't a lot of character development like you would expect in a drama thriller, but it's more about the tension and the characters reacting to it than, in-depth characterization. Because for a film like this, you don't really need in-depth characterization. Now, if the film was like a miniseries or something, or it was like a 2-part film, then you probably would need it. But for a standalone film that is a little less than 2 hours, you don't really need it. Like, all you need is for the characters, like MacReady, he's a pilot, he drinks a lot, he likes to play chess. Blair, he's a doctor guy, and he's really thinking a lot about humanity. Childs, he comes off as a little bit of an asshole. Knowles, he's the new guy. The rest of them, work there like another doctor and all that, and they're kind of friendly. And that's really all you really need, and it works. I don't know if that's how it was in the original film, but I'm going to guess it kind of was. And that's kind of also one of the problems with the newer film, but I'll get to that. Another thing I want to mention, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, is that the dog that they used to play the Thing dog is actually a wolf-dog hybrid, which explains how it acted and with how it interacts with the actors, which I have to say that was actually probably a pretty good move. Granted, the trainer is going to be able to control it just so it doesn't go too wolf-like on people, but you could tell from how it's working, how it's moving, that it's not a normal dog. And this is something apparently I read on IMDb. Apparently, it can sit, according to IMDb's goof section, the fact that the Norwegian doesn't speak in English is considered a plot hole. I'm like, really? Okay. Any educated Norwegian would know how to speak English and probably would be yelling in English. But one, that would spoil the whole tension thing, and two, the guy is obviously under stress. Even if he speaks English, he's probably, whatever happened at the place is probably just going to break into normal Norwegian, and from what I also read on IMDb, it's broken Norwegian. Now, from what I know about English, if you're under that kind of stress, it's going to vary from person, but you'll probably speak in broken English a little bit, especially if, if the stress and all that is being countered with testosterone and adrenaline to try to get the thing, and these people are not listening because obviously they don't speak Norwegian. So it kind of makes sense, broken Norwegian and all that. It makes sense to me. I forget there was another one listed, but I forget what it was, but it kind of came off as stupid. I'm like, really? That'd be more of a, for one thing, the Norwegian thing would be more of a factual error if you don't buy the whole, oh, he doesn't speak English thing. That one would be a plot hole. Especially when you take into account in the pre-make that only one of them didn't speak English. But anyway, that's all. I think that's maybe why someone listed it as a plot hole. Oh, but in the prequel they speak English. That would be a retroactive continuity, so keep it away from this film. Anyway, nothing really else to go in depth with this. The acting is great, the tension and pacing of the film is great, writing is pretty good. The cinematography and lighting is all great. Like, I like the blue lighting when it's dark, because obviously you have to see what's going on, but it works excellently with the tone of the film. The ending is a little downbeat when you look at it, even if you view Childs as being a human, because of the fact eventually. Oh yeah, that's what the other thing. It listed that if they were both humans, they would have jumped in the fire, which is kind of true. They would have, but they sit there for a while. Even if they were both human, they're probably waiting to see if the thing is actually dead. And if it is, or isn't, if it is, they'll probably burn themselves just to make sure, just in case. But if you go with Carpenter's interpretation, you can kind of see why. Because MacReady's probably, wary of Childs, and Childs is like, does he know? So, either way, that's not really it. It's like, it's kind of like Oh, we're in a little bit of a Mexican standoff. Actually, down here we just call it a standoff. I couldn't resist doing that. Anyway, my rating for John Carpenter's The Thing is a 5 out of 5, because to me it is a textbook horror film. I mean, it has great scares, especially if you don't know they're coming. It works better the first time you see the film, but it could still make you jump a little bit. Let's say the acting, the tension, the pacing, the direction, and the cinematography and lighting, and even this musical score, combined with excellent special effects, make this movie an 80s classic, and a classic in general. Now, one thing though is that I always wondered why this, and that is why at the end when we see the Thing in its final form, why it doesn't do anything. And of course, now watching the documentary and finding out it's because of the stop motion of the time, I'm like, okay, that's a little more excusable. I guess that's why they decided to just have MacReady go, yeah, well, fuck you too. I guess that makes that scene work a little bit more. And one thing I noticed is that it seems that parts of this film seem to be, even if it's not intentionally, have inspired some of the stuff in some of the Resident Evil games. Specifically the Tyrant character. Maybe it's just me making this connection with how they all transform and all that. And it made me think, you know, it'd be interesting to see them try to do a prequel game of what happened in the mansion before the first game ends the Zero game. You know, with the scientists, or even if it's just like a mini game or something. But that's just me, just thinking of something. Probably a little short film would work better, because then you pace it like this, and then of course it's excusable that the ending's downbeat because, you know, what happens. Of course, or maybe it'd probably work better as like a little fan novel or something, but that's just me looking at that. That was just something that came to mind when I was rewatching the film. Like I said, 5 out of 5, and if you haven't seen this 80s classic, do it, or prepare to be assimilated.